On Monday, Tucker Carlson dropped a 2-hour episode of his podcast. It was a conversation with Martyr-Made podcast host Darryl Cooper, described by Carlson as potentially the best and most honest popular historian in the United States. Cooper, seemingly with Carlson's encouragement, argued Winston Churchill was the, quote, chief villain of World War II, though he did note that shouldn't be interpreted as a veneration of Hitler or Stalin. Cooper also, though, did seem to explain Nazi death camps as mainly a tragic solution to logistical failures. The West is not the protagonist it believes itself to be, Cooper and Carlson argued. On their way to that conclusion, one that used to be popular mainly on the fringes of the far left, the pair took some detours that call into question why the American right, including, by the way, Candace Owens, is now reopening chapters of history it long dismissed as dangerous communist propaganda. The eyes of the world turned to Cooper and Carlson after the episode aired. Martyr-Made shot up the charts, historians weighed in, denouncements were registered all across the media. But it was UnHerd contributor Mary Harrington who penned by far the most interesting response to Cooper and Carlson. Mary joins us now on Undercurrents. Subscribe to the Undercurrents channel, leave us comments and reviews, and of course, sign up for the full unedited version of these interviews at undercurrents.tv. Mary joins us now. Mary Harrington, welcome to Undercurrents.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. Mary, is this the woke right? Are we seeing right now the rise of the woke right? In your piece, you argue this could be a 1619 equivalent for American right, what the 1619 Project was for the American left. So is that what this is?
When I mention woke, what I'm referring to particularly is a striking similarity between what's happening here with Darryl Cooper's analysis of World War II and what we're now familiar with in the everyday culture war, if you like, that's been ongoing for some time. And this is premised for the culture war that we're familiar with, which is the predominantly left-wing one. The underlying premise of everything which happens there is an analysis of what's going on with narrative, with language, with history, and with power, which is well established in contemporary critical theory, which says that reality isn't as real as everybody says it is. Reality is, to a significant extent, some of them believe entirely, but most of them just somewhat, constructed by the stories that we tell about it. So if you reshape the stories, you also reshape the realm of the possible. You reshape what's available as a political response to something. You reshape how people are able to react to something just by changing the stories that we tell about it. And if that sounds very abstract, what it looks like in practice is rewriting all of the captions in a museum, for example, so they no longer say our hero, and now they say our slave-owning toe rag monster abuser. What that does, or at least in theory, at least, what that does over time, is to reshape how we think of our past in order, or at least so the hope goes, to open up a better or different or more positive or more politically congenial present for whoever it is who's doing the refactoring of history. Now, this is something familiar on the left. Just the other week in the United Kingdom, Nottingham University announced that they'll no longer be using the term Anglo-Saxon in the teaching of Anglo-Saxon history. A strange idea, you might think. They're doing this, or so they say, in order to decolonize, I quote, in quotes, the curriculum. Which is to say, to make it less amenable to being employed by people who want to construct narratives of racial atavism or nativism, or of a particular ethnic group having a long-standing claim to the English land, for example. So that's one field in which on the left. But what I find very interesting about what Martyr-Made is doing and about the World War II revisionism is that it's premised in very much the same analysis of history and power and language and ideology, in that what Martyr-Made and really Tucker are setting themselves against is what they view as an account of the Second World War, which is a fundamental cornerstone of the post-war consensus, which, in the view of the people who take this stance, is structurally left-wing.
Right.
There are other theorists on the right, usually on the politically radioactive right, who make very similar arguments. For example, the French cultural critic Renaud Camus, who is considered persona non grata across all respectable media, more or less.
And Mary, can you just explain like a little context on like why that is?
Why is Renaud Camus considered persona non grata? Well, he coined the phrase "the Great Replacement," which has subsequently taken on something of a life of its own. Is generally denounced as a right-wing conspiracy theory, which of ethnic replacement. Cognate with various other more or less swivel-eyed theories about the World Economic Forum and Davos and so on and so forth. Renaud Camus' thesis, his actual argument is much simpler than that, but it's much more a critique of an ideology than it is, and he explicitly disavows this what he calls conspiracy theory, which he says is just not something he subscribes to at all. But we'll leave that aside. He coined the phrase, and he's an articulate critic of what he sees as the post-war ideology, which in his view forecloses the possibility of talking about European ethnic groups, which he characterizes as the second career of Adolf Hitler. And this is, just to bring it back to World War II revisionism and the conceptual universe, the conceptual framework within which figures such as Martha Mead are operating. There is a view that structures of narrative and encoding certain political interests have foreclosed certain discursive and political possibilities by weaponizing a very particular narrative about what World War II meant. Central to which is this sort of super demon in the form of Adolf Hitler, who and his Nazis, all of whom are presumed to embody somehow all of the evil in the world. And what I found so interesting about this conversation, well, two aspects. Firstly, the structural similarities between the right wing deconstruction of World War II as a myth. World War II discourse, if you like, World War II narrativization, and previous progressive left deconstructions of, for example, the American founding. And this is why I drew a parallel with the 1619 Project.
Right.
I don't think that Martha Mead's World War II revisionism is a response to the 1619 Project, but the 1619 Project is a very notorious example of an attempt to re-narrativize a very central load-bearing piece of political mythology in the context of America. I mean, it's difficult to think of a more load-bearing bit of mythology for America, as an outsider, than the American founding, right? I mean, this is sort of the touchstone from which everything else flows, unless I'm much mistaken, for a great deal of American history since 1776. And then along comes this historical revisionist project that says, no, actually, that wasn't when your history began. Your history began with the arrival of the first slaves in America, and all of a sudden, it's a completely different history. There are two parallels really there between the 1619 Project and Martha Mead's revisionism. Firstly, in the underlying premise, which is that if we re-narrativize, then perhaps it will open up different future political possibilities for us that are more congenial to our outlook and our aims. And secondly, that it's to the best of my understanding, because I'm not an expert either on the founding or on the early history of America, or indeed on the nuts and bolts of World War II, but to the best of my understanding and expert opinion, both of them are somewhat sloppy history. 1619 has been roundly criticised, as I understand it, not just by conservatives, although very vigorously by conservatives, for to put it gently, a tendentious use of the facts.
Yes.
And I get the impression that that some of the views set out on the Tucker Carlson podcast earlier this week had something of the same quality of tendentiousness and perhaps selectivity.
Mary, what's so interesting to me about that is what you're describing, 1619 Project and all of these like various 20th century projects of revisionist history, they were sort of explicitly in some cases rooted in Marxism, that this was a Marxist project to rewrite the capitalist narratives. And 1619 kind of says that America was founded on racial capitalism instead of, this ideological narrative of egalitarianism that we've been fed for so long. And that's kind of what Martyr Maid, Darryl, and Tucker were talking about with Winston Churchill. That Winston Churchill had these sort of racial capitalist tendencies. And what's fascinating about that is what prevented the Tucker Carlsons of the world from criticizing Tucker for decades was a anti-communist bent. We were in the Cold War, and communists who were trying to point out inconvenient facts for the West that, in some cases are legitimate, in some cases very much are not, that frustrate this broader narrative, you can't listen to them because they're communists. And now, Mary, what's so interesting is that it's almost like a horseshoe of the communist historical project.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And you can probably point to some other cases where, having won the Cold War, America has ended up with much more suffused by communist heritage ideas since the end of the Cold War than was perhaps the case beforehand. As though the Cold War was a tension which was keeping certain ideologies suppressed. In the absence of that tension, there's a kind of it's suddenly all up for grabs again. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But I suppose the other interesting factor for me, along with this, the propagation of wokeness into the right, I'm forever telling right wingers that they ought to read Marx. Not necessarily for the mad teleology, but there's a critique of there are all sorts of critiques in there which are absolutely worth having a look at. But the other interesting fact for me is that whatever else Darryl Cooper is wrong on, and I'm not a World War II buff, and I'm just going to stay well away from the whole debunking discourse. I'm going to leave that to people who are qualified to do it. But whatever he gets wrong, or whatever he's cherry picking, or massaging, in the service of his arguments, the sheer vehemence of the response to his effort at rewriting World War II history and knocking some of its sacred idols and sacred dogmas off their pillars suggests that whatever else he's got wrong, he's not a million miles wide of the mark where it comes to pointing at World War II as having that quality of sacred dogma,
as being the founding myth, right?
Right. So it's obviously not like you could argue about crop rotation in the 14th century and you're not going to get cancelled, right? Because nobody cares.
I dare you, Mary.
I say that, I guess, but you can post an opinion about menswear on Twitter and end up getting death threats. So I mean, somebody might cancel me, but you're not going to get the kind of response that this podcast just got if you post a revisionist opinion about crop rotation in the 14th century. World War II, on the other hand, very much so. There's something there which is clearly a load-bearing political narrative. And I tried to make that point in the article that actually, the stories that we tell about World War II have they've changed since the end of World War II. And I cited A.J.P. Taylor, who's an eminent 20th century English historian, who gives a very different account of the origins of the Second World War to the Hitler was evil and just decided to invade everybody because he's Satan. One kind of popular one, which, I'm paraphrasing very crudely, but you get that a lot. He was an evil demon and he just wanted to smash everything up because demons or whatever. Whereas, Taylor's argument is that it was about geopolitics and it was really a continuation of World War One. And what's actually interesting is that this sort of Manichaean good versus evil myth has even now been retrofitted onto World War One in a way which is even at odds with the way I was taught history in school. I hear even English people, but also Americans saying, "Oh yeah, World War One was fought to defend democracy," and I'm like, "What? No, it really wasn't. World War One was about empire. Every history book prior to really quite recently will make the point that World War One was about geopolitics, and it was about it was about the balance of power, and it was about complicated various European nations trying to balance against one another. But somehow that story about freedom and democracy has been retrofitted onto World War One, and you think, well, if that's the case, to what extent was that actually true about World War Two? I don't know, but the central point here is that the stories we tell about immense events like that do change over time. And again, this is a very postmodern point. This is in making an argument like this, I'm not a million miles from the woke left, even if I don't share all of their priors. That frame that sees large scale political and historical narratives in the context of contemporary political cultural expediency and, to an extent, systems of power. Is a very postmodern, which is to say really woke, way of looking at it.
A narrative is a story that is constructed ideally based on facts, and you're always selecting which facts and which facts do not fit into that narrative, which is, to your point, it's postmodern. It doesn't have to be anti-truth. It just accepts that narrative is always narrative rather than fact. It's a construction of facts.
In the context of World War II revisionism, like I'm open to it. I sort of feel like the Manichaean narrative leaves a lot to be desired. It leaves a lot of things out of the picture, and it legitimizes a lot of political stances that I don't personally support. I'm open to the possibility of revising or complicating or problematizing that narrative. But, and I would say the same thing about the 1619 project, if you're going to do revisionist history, you have to do it based on the facts. You can't just make stuff up.
It's easier to make stuff up when everyone is telling you that actual facts are not actual facts for political reasons. And that's what's frustrating, is the people who are recasting, say, World War I as a battle for lowercase d democracy are the ones that are shutting down, in some cases, true information, which makes it all the more hard to say to the people spreading like actual disinformation about history, hey, you got to roll it back, because they're saying the disinformation police are coming for me, and they have a point sometimes, but not always, and that makes it more powerful when they don't have a point.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I don't know that there's no cut and dried solution apart from just pointing out what's true. When somebody's obviously making things up, you need enough nerds you need a battery of nerds who can say, no, actually that's not true.
Mary Harrington, absolute pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.